Hi, everyone. So good to see you. So I'd also like to begin by commending the Cleveland Museum of Contemporary Art for their presentation of Superlight. They've done a magnificent job on all fronts, and Ray Juarez and his crew have made the exhibition a wonderful experience to walk through. Margot has been a real collaborator, and the entire staff of the museum has been super helpful and knowledgeable and professional in putting this exhibition together. Thank you for letting me work with you. Superlight, as you know, originated at the 2008 01 SJ Biennial in San Jose. And I'd also like to acknowledge Joel Slayton, 01's executive director, who is here tonight. Joel's been on the board of 01 since it was founded in 2000, collaborated with me on both 2006 and 2008 biennials, and took a leave from San Jose State University to become executive director of 01 this past summer. We're very fortunate to have his experience, knowledge, and skills at the helm of the organization. Finally, as some of you, and perhaps it's a greater percentage than some, know that tomorrow there'll be a symposium, Cool Fusion, which has been organized by MOCA Cleveland and Case Western, the Baker Nord Center for Humanities there. I'm delighted to see many of you from the past decade here tonight. Each of you has had a huge role in helping develop on the curatorial and institutional side of the equation, whatever it is this field that we're in. And that's partly what I'd like to talk about tonight. What is it that you, the audience, are looking at? What is it that you, the artist, are doing? And my first point is just that there is no way to narrow down the practice of, just as there is no way to narrow down the practice of photography as being only documentary or only abstract, only film-based, or only black and white or color, there is no way, and frankly, no need, to think of so-called new media art as a narrow endeavor that blinks when you push a button, or whatever your favorite form of interactivity is. The 01 SJ Biennial consciously subtitles itself as a global festival of art on the edge, not computer art, not new media art, not digital art, although we are also focused on supporting and presenting exceptional creativity at the intersection of art, technology, and digital culture. Over the past two biennials, we have presented over 250 works of art in the visual arts, performing arts, moving image, and of course, interactive arts, by more than 500 artists from around the world. The selection of Superlight you will see tonight is just that, a selection from the 2008 01 SJ Biennial. And I'd like to quickly throw up some images of other works from the biennial just to emphasize the wide range of possibility encompassed by the term screensaver. Just to emphasize the wide range of possibility encompassed by the nomenclature at the leading edge of digital culture. And by the way, a lot of these screens are from the Superlight catalog, which has now been printed and is being bound, designed by a really remarkable designer, Matthew Rezak, with Andrew Blauvelt, and hopefully will be available for purchase in another couple of weeks. So here we have Jim Campbell's piece, which we commissioned, first in San Fernando, 10,000 watts. And he's created, as usual, a very low resolution video platform using light bulbs as one form of new media art. Tony Dove and Luc Boudoir presented their interactive film Spectropia. Jason Freeman used the placement of audience and musicians in the space of the stage to create a dynamic score for the Rova saxophone quartet. Michael Herman, a Paris-based architect, created a very luminous centerpiece for the Central Plaza at the Biennial out in front of the Museum of Art. And Bruce Gardner and Ethan Miller designed an interactive, essentially Google Earth map that you could zoom in on through the floor mat. And Michael Herman's idea was this sort of collapsing of space between physical space and virtual space, which of course we're all living in, and the need for architects to really design for this environment and not against it or oblivious about it. Peter Hudson brought his really fantastically fun zoetrope from Burning Man called Homoroboros. It uses strobe lights at night or strobe goggles during the day so that it created a moving image of an ape reaching out for the fruit of knowledge. Robin Lasser and Adrian Powell were commissioned to create a new dress tent called Glacial Retreat Dress Tent. They performed it 4 times throughout the festival. Here they are at the Sub-Zero event of local artists along the First Avenue. And inside, underneath the dress, as you go in, you find out more information about the retreat of glaciers due to global warming. Ruben Ortiz Torres from San Diego worked with a crew to create a new kind of scissor lift that's basically based on the idea of lowrider modifications, and it actually performed its dance at the opening ceremony and then was exhibited at the MOCA Festival, who was the co-commissioner with us. Ido Stern commissioned to do a site-specific installation for the San Jose State campus called Portal Wormhole Fly-Through. And he created, onto this donut-like structure, he projected the sort of generic or prototypical tunnel animations that you see whenever you go from one dimension to another in the movies, or maybe in your mind as well. But it seems like Silicon Valley is really a perfect place to have this portal into another dimension using these movies that he'd collected over many years. And finally, Craig Walsh did the 3rd installation that we worked with the City Hall Rotunda designed by Richard Meyer. And what Craig found out through some research is that this site at 4th and San Fernando in San Jose was actually the site of the very first public Grateful Dead concert. And so, which was partly his choice of the colors, but also I think in a interesting way in thinking about what is the history of the new media art that we're talking about. They also projected through oil-filled lamps, so it was a kind of initial and very early VJing going on at this very first public concert and LSD sampling of the Grateful Dead. So what he's done is a 12 channel video projection where here you see the tentacles completely taking over the dome, but it starts off at a very low level and then builds up over an hour-long presentation. So these are sort of, I think, start to give you a sense, and as you get it, the art formerly known as new media, my favorite moniker for the field, is wide-ranging and impossible to pigeonhole, even if it does pigeon blog. And here's a picture of Beatrice DaCosta's pigeon blog project from 2006, where she created a 7-ounce device that was a cell phone, a pollution measuring device, and a GPS. And as the pigeons flew back home to their carrier pigeons or homing pigeons flew back home, they would automatically record the pollution levels at the location they were in the sky and then phone that in and became a dynamic visualization of pollution in San Jose area. But the question tonight is, what is Superlight? And first of all, I should say that for the 2006 01SJ Biennial, which was held in conjunction with the 13th International Symposium on Electronic Arts, or ISEA, both shared 5 themes: interactive city, community domain, Pacific Rim, transvergence, and edgy products. They also shared over 300 jurors. It was a phenomenal process, which we did not want to repeat. In 2008, I decided that rather than disqualifying a project because it did not fit into some predetermined theme, we would make a selection of the most compelling work from the past 2 years and see where it led. Straight to Superlight. Without premeditation, 2 things that struck me about the selections for the 2008 01SJ Biennial were that artists' issues and concerns ranged widely and were seldom about technology per se. And secondly, many of the artists were using humor and the slick surfaces of pop/everyday culture to create very accessible works about very complex topics. Now, I hasten to add that the curator's point of view is not necessarily the point of view of the artist, and nor is it, of course, automatically correct. And I think this tension is appropriate. It's just that sometimes it's maybe more useful than other times. So while no artist made work to fit the theme of the biennial, by the same token, probably no artist completely agrees with the theme. And that's okay in my opinion. Good artwork will always exceed what a curator can say about it. Hopefully what I have to say about the works tonight will be helpful and of interest, but in no way will it define the experience you have as you engage the works individually and the exhibition as a whole. So to recap, the art formerly known as new media is broad, and Superlight is not about technology. So what's it about? Well, this is where the title of the talk comes in, Superlight, Somewhat Heavy. In 6 memos for the next millennium, Italo Calvino described different, quote, values, qualities, or peculiarities of literature, end quote, in which he wanted to situate the, quote, so-called post-industrial era of technology, end quote. One of these qualities was lightness, about which he wrote in part. Then we have computer science. It is true that software cannot exercise its powers of lightness except through the weight of hardware. But it is software that gives the orders acting on the outside world and on machines that exist only as functions of software and evolve so they can work out ever more complex programs. The second industrial revolution, unlike the first, does not present us with such crushing images as rolling mills and molten steel, but with bits in a flow of information traveling along circuits in the form of electronic impulses. The iron machine still exists, but they obey the orders of weightless bits. I think it's a pretty amazing kind of analysis of the situation by someone who's not necessarily directly in the field. Unfortunately for us, but nicely for this talk, we are in the midst of a perfect storm of what Calvino is referring to. Charles Sheeler's 1927 crisscrossed conveyors Ford plant, which you're looking at now, clearly illustrates 20th century industry. Heroic, iconic, new, not particularly questioned. How to represent, however, the second, what Calvino calls the second or post-industrial era of technology. When the news media wanted, in Calvino's terms, crushing images of the tangible fallout of the financial crisis, almost all they could do was stake out the Lehman Brothers building in Times Square, hounding newly released workers paparazzi style in an attempt to capture a money shot of a tear or at least a grimace as they carried cardboard boxes of personal possessions into the streets. Poignant, yes, but not a particularly enlightening depiction of tarnished derivatives or broken algorithms, of Calvino's bits whose orders must be obeyed. How in the 21st century to make sense of the world around us, which is increasingly based on algorithms and bits and nanoscale particles and stuff in general that we cannot touch or have so much, or stuff that has so much complexity that it's difficult for any one person to grasp it. This is the daunting task of us all, in a sense, but in particular for the artist, and it is what the artists in Superlight do. They create compelling experiences about topics which are often difficult to grasp and cause us to ponder these issues in a way that a 1,000-page report of scientific data about global climate change is unlikely to, for example. Now, in some ways, Hurricane Katrina is a harbinger of the, quote, heavy weather to come due to global climate change. But what Jane Marshing in her project Future North Ecotarium writes about is sort of the difficulty to grasp that, even despite the sort of very obvious devastation that happened in something like Katrina. She writes, climate change is in the news constantly, relentlessly, bleakly. Stories of future disasters, of ineffectual changes, of ever more catastrophic climate models create a picture that many find daunting and off-putting. We have become better at recycling, using fluorescent light bulbs, etc., but still the problem seems so huge and complex that it's easier to turn away or indulge in cynical dystopic visions. No cynical dystopic visions for Jane and Mitchell. They they imagined the plight of coastal cities in the likely event of a 3-meter sea level rise. In a 3-minute stop-motion animation, the video suggests that some port cities are capable of a large-scale architectural engineering response. Manhattan is enclosed with an ecotarium able to float away, as can Tokyo, Casablanca, San Francisco, and others. They all float north up to Svalbard and the North Pole, now the hottest real estate market in the world. And they come together in a global nomadic community. I don't believe that these are literal proposals, but it is their very sci-fi nature that makes one wonder what one would do if Manhattan was about to disappear. In another work by Marina Zerkow called Paradoxical Sleep, which was commissioned for the San Jose Convention Center, she writes, "Paradoxical sleep, sighted on screens throughout the convention center, unfolds as a suite of video portraits of the building and the nearby Guadalupe River, meshing the two sites into a single tributary of flood and flow. The screens become magic mirrors, making visible what is invisible to the naked eye: memory, speculation, and projection. The term paradoxical sleep refers to the sleep state during which the brain is active and dreaming occurs. In the unstable ecosystem of altered terrains, the river emerges anew, otherworldly and depopulated, flooding the places where you stand. As the poet says, in dreams begin responsibility." I think one of the things interesting about the actual installation of this work is that it really engaged the workers at the convention center, and they became unbidden sort of explainers of the project, maybe for two reasons. One is Marina paid a lot of attention to the details, and so there would be a duct vent that no one normally pays any attention to, and she would have mold growing out of it in the animation. And the HVAC guy really loved that. And he would sort of, in a sense, adopt that piece and start explaining it to people who were looking at it. But the other thing that happens is this sort of confusion between different kinds of spaces and different kinds of imaginings. And that's because people would be standing in this actual hallway watching this sort of tidal wave of growth coming toward them and saying, are they recording that somewhere? It must be a surveillance camera. And I think it's understanding how these systems work engages a very visceral response that again raises the issues of why this might happen, as well as being a particularly enjoyable piece. For the museum installation, both in San Jose and here, Marina created very appropriate and quite beautiful installations hanging from a pole of these camera shots that you'll see in the exhibition. So let's talk about torture. Peter Szohalski's If Then talks about, in 1991, during the Gulf War, millions of leaflets were dropped by American forces over to strategic Iraqi sites, including an image of a $25 dinar work note with a message printed in Arabic script: "Honor will never be regained, no matter what the cost is." I would love it if someone could explain that to me. Peter talks about this work in terms of telecommunication systems and intercultural dialogue, which is well enough. But the other debate going on right now, of course, is around what actually constitutes torture. Some people hear sleep deprivation or stress positions and think that's not torture, it's just not fun. The US military dropped hundreds of thousands of similar leaflets as Peter's, with the words, "Honor will never be gained." It's not an objective directive, it's a kind of psychological warfare. How would it actually feel if we walked outside of our doors and waded through a drift of such leaflets? The context is critical to understanding whether something is torture or not. And it's not just about being in a room with Jack Bauer. So the other thing that he created these devices, and probably some of you remember the New York Times article a few months ago, where they revealed that a lot of the talking heads on television, retired military personnel, had these special briefings from the Pentagon, which in their internal memos referred to them as force multipliers because of their ability to take the Pentagon's message and transmit it through the supposedly objective, or if you're objective media. And so he now calls these boxes force multiplier dispensers. And here's the idea of, that this is kind of thing would be all around you, raining down on you. You don't know what's going to happen next. It's a terrible situation. So we'll try something else here. This is Luc Dubois and Leanne Amaris and their piece, Fashionably Late for the Relationship. For this piece, Leanne scripted and directed and performed for 72 hours, getting made up to go out. And it was a 72-hour endurance performance on a traffic island in Manhattan. Luc filmed this with 3 high-definition cameras and then created 2 different versions of it. One is a 72-minute straight cinema version, and one is the 3-channel projection, which you'll see in the installation. At one level, this 72-hour performance is about the repetition of what Leanne calls gender maintenance. And she's really trying to do her motions at about 1/60th speed. So when you see her brushing her hair for a couple of minutes, she was doing that on camera for 2 hours. And of course, in the Superlight vein, there's the inevitable refrain that Luc asks at the end, "Honey, are you ready to go yet?" But I think underlying this sort of incredible focus on this idea of gender maintenance is that gender maintenance also leads to gender differentiation. So that push-up in this sort of very simple example of a Google search means 2 very different things, whether it's a woman or a man. And of course, those differences lead to very real-world differences that are not as humorous as the piece that is presented in the exhibition. The fact that women are treated differently than men in terms of wages, and probably any number of other differences that one could come up with in regards to the maintenance of differences in gender. We all probably spend our fair share of time in big box retailers, especially of the electronic consumer product variety. Even before the recent meltdown and sort of perhaps the closing of Circuit City and other economic issues like that, there's of course a huge disposable issue or sustainability issue, to put it from the other side of the coin. How can we sustain this level of production and consumption in an equally just society? And it's a big question, of course, and C.J. Wang addresses it in a very indirect way, I would argue. He addresses it by creating these sort of magical interactive environments or ecosystems using the detritus of consumer products to create these almost adorable kinds of creatures that you walk through. So it's a very seductive experience, but again, I think underlying it is this notion of, makes us sort of think, well, if he can do that, if he can recycle those products, it's not necessarily a suggestion that we all do the same kind of thing, but surely there must be other kinds of uses or other ways to think about not having to reuse these products than throwing them away and letting them and grow up in the landfill. This is an installation view from San Jose, and this is an in-progress view from here in Cleveland. In the United States, probably one of the most famous portrait records is Edward Curtis's North American Indian. And there's been so much written about this in terms of its truth or not, its historical accuracy or not. Certainly, he would create studio-like situations and give the sitters for the images the kinds of things that he thought would look good in an image, not necessarily the kinds of things that they would live with or work with always. And the other thing that so it was sort of it was sort of catering to our assumptions about what Native Americans should or did look like. And at the same time, by fixing the image as a portrait, they become an extinct race as opposed to a living race. And that, of course, is another huge problem about the photographing of something that appears to be saving history but may actually be crystallizing it in a problematic way. There's a similar kind of issue in Australia, of course, going on with the Aboriginal population there and its colonial history. Genevieve Greaves is a Warimi Nation Aboriginal who lives in what we call Australia, and she was working in the Library of Victoria looking at these colonial portraits that have these very typical sense of the warrior, the family, the mourning, the children, different kinds of scenes that at the time were sort of being captured for posterity, but of course, as I was just saying, froze things into place. And what she's done in a really fantastic way, I think, is created 9-minute video portraits that reimagine the entire scene again, from setting it up and seeing the photographer give the props to the sitters, to them when the photographer's back is turned, shaking their sticks at them and making jokes, and exactly the kind of thing that you could imagine actually happening during a studio session like that. And by making it a living situation, I think we re-understand the past and thereby are able to re-understand the present of the relations between, I guess, Anglo-Australians and Aboriginal Australians. And it's a very powerful, but also a very evocative statement about an ongoing and living culture and not a dead one. So here's the prototypical UN report. It's related to the one for which the Climate Change Committee received the Nobel Prize. And in a sense, we have all the information we need, or at least at a vastly increased scale compared to previously. On the internet, we can get all these different reports, but as Jane was writing in her earlier text, it's a little overwhelming. What do we do with that? Well, another thing that she did was this project Rising North. And she took that report and basically extrapolated it as a series of color field portraits. So from actual readings of the Arctic temperature by month in 2006, she then took the projected figures for those months over the next 100 years, 2007, 2008, 2009, etc. And then she assigned them, of course, a relative color similar to the color that we see in the USA Today weather graphics. And you get this sort of color field abstract experience of this, what happens over 100 years in a kind of time-lapse way about the difference in temperature. So it's a very aesthetic, almost contemplative experience. But then I think another thing that's interesting, she added to that a soundtrack where she commissioned an opera singer to essentially not ad lib, but riff off of the Google headlines about the North Pole on a certain day, November 11, 2007. And that becomes the soundtrack to this piece. And I think one writer has pointed out a very interesting aspect about that by treating it as an operatic experience, it's really acknowledging that the North Pole is this kind of dramatic core of our debates and thoughts about the climate change issues. And it's also a very complex, Godfather-like experience where we don't really know everything that's going on. So treating it like opera, like a story, like a narrative that has both fiction and fact is a way of acknowledging that this is something powerfully true, but powerfully complicated that we can't completely understand at the factual level. Oops, wrong button. So we all know the world is flat. You all came from 35,000 feet today and appreciate that, or at least many of you did. And I think we are understanding the world is flat, Thomas Friedman's book, in a very different way as we see that the interconnection turns the US housing mortgage crisis into a global depression, potentially. But again, that's not necessarily how the artist would approach it. Corey Archangel, in his project Untitled Translation Exercise, took the script of Richard Linklater's teen flick Dazed and Confused and FedExed it more or less sight unseen to an Indian outsourcing firm. And he FedExed it with a tape recorder, and he asked them, the members of that organization, to record the different voices or parts in the script. They sent the tape back, and he redubbed the film. So what you have is this sort of very teen, extremely American film being spoken in, quote unquote, Indian English. And at first, it's a little bit like a Saturday Night Live skit. There's a little humor in it. It's like, it sounds so off that it's funny. But as he says himself, after a while, it becomes painful. And I think after a while, that pain sort of translates into, well, what are the cultural ramifications of a globalized world, and how does that affect each of us, and what does it mean about the way that culture is both hegemonic, going out, but also comes back to us in both very expressive and exciting ways, but also in some bastardized ways. So it's a sideways comment, but it is a comment about thinking about the world as flat kind of scenario. I managed to erase this movie from our hard drive just before the opening, but this is part of what we're calling the future films section of the exhibition, where 10 different films or short films are being presented. This one is by an artist named Daniel Garcia Andujar, and it's called Honor. And in it, he mixes real footage taken by mostly US military of actual actions in Iraq, along with machinima or game-based versions of various war games. And he mixes those together in a narrative that he interestingly calls Honor, sort of like Peter Szohalski's piece, that both uses the popular media and the idea of remixing and the ubiquity of YouTube to create a new kind of commentary and expression about the war in Iraq. And there are 9 other works that are looking at different ways of filmmaking, from cell phones to surveillance cameras. And again, using those systems and those technologies to make the artist's personal statement, not the sort of the implied statement through the means of the technology. Kota Izawa, German-born, San Francisco-based artist, has 3 light boxes in the exhibition called $150 New and Untitled. They're based on the spring 2007 Isaiah catalog. This is not Isaiah, excuse me, IKEA. Freudian slip, maybe? And you can see, so this is actually the 2008 catalog, but you can get a sense of how his simplification creates a much more, creates a different image. In $150 New and Untitled, these 3 light boxes display colorful cartoonish drawings, a result of the artist's unique process of hand tracing and computer manipulation. Izawa writes about these familiar yet enigmatic images. In his book, The System of Objects, the French cultural theorist Jean Baudrillard claims that real furniture ceased to exist and that all we are looking for today in furniture stores is solutions to our life's problems. In front of this background, Izawa writes, my new drawings try to decipher the spring 2007 IKEA catalog as an archive of contemporary problems and their proposed solutions. The drawings further imagine the interiors depicted devoid of their advertisement function as theater stages for the drama of contemporary life. So in a sense, I think what he's saying, or what Kota is responding to, is this notion of, if I had just the right set of shelves, my life would be much more organized. If I had just the right bedroom for my kids, they would be really creative. And that this is a catalog of we project all of our needs onto this possible solution. And part of the reason I was interested in this work for this particular exhibition is that I think that's sort of how very indicative of a relationship to technology in general. If only I had an iPhone, I would be cool. If only I had the right Windows software, I would be able to catalog everything in my life and everything would be in place. And it's this kind of relationship that becomes actually a syndrome of its own desires. It's a kind of technophilia. And technophilia is this sort of love of technology for technology itself, and not for what it can do, or as Izawa points out, what it does to you, what it does to us, that it's not a neutral thing. And I think it's in this regard that I was one of the ways I think about Bruce Charles' works, Love Disorder, which he produced in collaboration with Colleen Ludwig. And what I want to do is sort of read a little bit of what Bruce has to say about it, and then think about it as this relationship with technology, and then end up with something more. So what Bruce says about this piece, I think, is exactly right and very appropriate, and it's certainly not the point that I'm making necessarily. Love Disorder is a one-room interactive environment in which a video character talks to visitors and responds emotionally to their movement in the space. When you enter the environment, you see a 12-foot high face on a video screen at the far end of the room. The face says, "I've been waiting for you." Or one of several other greetings. It will continue talking to you if you don't move, but the emotional tone of what it says will shift as you move closer to the screen or move away. It's a neurotic, manipulative character that uses a gamut of emotional ploys: flattery, coercion, anger, fear, ridicule, regret, longing, to trigger your movement within the space. The character knows if you're coming or going, and the ranges of its responses is complex enough that most people do find themselves interacting with it. This relationship between the artwork and the viewer is a significant factor in coming to an understanding of what I do in any medium.
Back off. You have 5 seconds to back off, or I'll back you up myself. Get away. I'll set your house on fire. Get on fire. I'll do it.
That character, and we've all known a character like that, is also the character technology. But it's more than that, of course. And Bruce continues, "In all my work, film, video, photographs, installations, writing, and performance, viewers are encouraged to invest themselves and their imagination in order to fill gaps in the logic of narratives in which there is significant ambiguity. I want people to feel personally connected to what my scenarios signify, to come to a sense of emotional recognition, and to continue puzzling out the meaning of my work after they leave. I'm motivated to reinterpret common subjects and experiences and to create new visual relationships between objects, places, and people. The beautiful aspects of these works are important by themselves, but they also function as inviting doorways into a world that's a reflection of troubled times." So I guess that's really where I would end it. What Bruce makes clear in the description of his work is that it's much more complex than my or any reduction into issues and solutions. The reason Superlight is an art exhibition is because of the aesthetic decisions that the artists bring to bear on their works. I have vastly underplayed this aspect. Each of the works in Superlight has a formal beauty and aesthetic complexity that is in itself beautiful. And I invite you to go into the galleries for a super experience. Thank you.